To item 12, I think it is 12.
Yes. That was the one that was emailed separately.
Yep. And it's the addendum agenda, and we've got Jacques Victor presenting. Oh, and Toby Shepherd. And the Mayor will move this, Deputy Mayor, to second.
Yep.
Sorry, Mr.
Jacques.
Chair, I actually put my apologies and I've got to leave at 3. I have another meeting.
Okay. Toby.
Okay, kia ora tātou and tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. So,
Licensing trust meeting.
the Upper North Island Supply Chain Strategy Working Group. So this is following on from the councillor workshop on Wednesday, am I too close to that? On Wednesday, the 21st of November. And I'll just give a sort of 5-minute rundown of the progress we made at the councillor workshop and where we are with the recs that you see before you today. So the government has established and appointed a working group in September to the Upper North Island Supply Chain Study, and the terms of reference are available online, and there's a link to those terms of reference on page 2 of the report. The working group will report 3 lines of inquiry to Cabinet, so the first being an Upper North Island supply chain review, the second being an Upper North Island supply chain strategy, which will include priorities for road, rail and other major infrastructure from a national perspective. And the third point to be aware of there is there's been no engagement directly with Auckland Council to date.
Yep.
And we are looking forward today to December the 13th, which will be the first engagement with Auckland Council and representatives from the working group. And we are preparing some key messages to convey at that meeting. Those key messages have also been reflected in a letter that we will give to the group at that time. And that's a letter that we have created, Auckland Council are writing. We're not responding to a call for a letter. So just briefly, at the workshop on Wednesday, we agreed 3 key messages to convey to the working group at that time. The first is the need to protect and enhance the commercial value of Ports of Auckland. Yep. And then, of course, that's true for the other Upper North Island ports and related industries within the supply chain. The second key message is that the work of the working group and their 3 lines of inquiry, I've just realised I didn't say the third line of inquiry. So the third line of inquiry, so we've got the Upper North Island Supply Chain Review, the Upper North Island Supply Chain Strategy, and the third is a feasibility study to move the Auckland Port with serious consideration to be given to Northport. So those are the 3 lines of inquiry that the working group is looking at and our key messages relate to. So the first key message is around that commercial value. The second is in their work, the working group should be data-led, information-led, should be undertaking a robust, evidence-based methodology. It should take the work of the Auckland Port Future Study, use that and move forward in taking a wider view with that next level of detail that we would expect from a national strategy project. And that enables confident decision-making as appropriate going forward by the appropriate bodies. The third message we discussed was the need for transparent, objective and inclusive processes by the working group to avoid any predetermination of outcomes by the working group. So just very quickly to touch on the specific issues that we are including in our recommendations II. So these are the material issues that we would hope that the working group, or we are asking and expecting the working group to cover in their process. So these are, and you'll note several of these are the product of councillor input at that workshop. So these are long-term feasible capacity at other existing North Island ports, long-term strategies to mitigate the contribution of supply chain activities to climate change, long-term strategies to adapt supply chains to the increased impacts of climate change, mana whenua iwi values and aspirations, including Te Tiriti or Waitangi settlements, social and community impacts of supply chains, the impacts of splitting or elongating supply chains, the impacts on the investment planning of stakeholders within the supply chains, the long-term engineering requirements, navigability, safety, and availability of any alternative location options, how and when any new infrastructure might be funded, and then the wider and long-term implications of the West Coast, East Coast port location question. I suppose you can see in there that in particular the climate change points and the mitigation strategies and the adaptation strategies reflects the discussion that we had at the workshop. And I'd also like to make the point, and we have done in the report, that given the long time frames involved, a scenarios-based approach is desirable, and we recommend that to the working group as well. And just to make the point that, and we're clear in the report and the letter, that the working group don't dismiss the work of the Port Future Study in identifying alternative location options in their wider study. Yeah. And of course the point about a transparent and objective inclusive approach. So the recommendations before you today kind of wrap that up in a nice neat package. So A deals with those three key messages I've just laid out. B agrees that the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, the Chair of the Planning Committee and an IMSB member, along with relevant staff, meet with the working group on the 13th to convey those messages, and we note in C the attached letter which reflects those key messages. So that's all I have, and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Toby. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just very quickly, Toby, I think a lot of us have expressed concern about this particular working party at the workshop. This is a key asset of Auckland Council's, and if you are looking at a strategic medium or longer term shift of the ports of Auckland to some other venue, does this working party have the capability or the resources to actually do that work, given there's only 4 or 5 companies in the world capable of delivering that from my Singapore experience?
So on that point, it's not clear what the detailed work program of the working group is at this stage. So we will be explicitly asking that at the meeting of the 13th of December. And we also do make the point that at this stage it appears that no adequate resource has been included to support the working group. We include that in the letter. So we'll be looking to see resources commensurate with the scale and the depth of technical information that we're looking for in this report.
Very big concern, Mr. Chairman. This is a key asset for the city for the medium and long term, in whatever form or shape that may be. One of your favourite sayings is once over lightly is certainly not good enough, and we need to have this done professionally and thoroughly.
Absolutely. Member Namani, please.
Oh.
It's just a question of clarification. I'm not sure if it's been raised before, but in sending the letter to the working group and making note of the importance of mana whenua within the mix of looking at the options given the previous study, does the letter intend to suggest that there ought to be a Māori member on the working group? I don't know if that was a conversation that's been had.
Maybe I could comment on that, Leanne. We had no say at all over those that were appointed to the working group. One member of the working group, I understand, is Maori, Greg Miller. I think he was a former advisor to the Maori King. What we haven't tried to do is to tell the government who to put on the working group, and they haven't asked us. So we probably can't at this point come in and make any recommendations for change. The committee did take a long time to get up and running. It was meant to start in February. It didn't start until September, but it's now appointed, and I don't think the government will contemplate making any alteration to that. My main problem with the committee is that the chair of the committee has predetermined the issue in some of his comments.
Thank you, Member Namani.
That would be right.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Just like to commend you on a number of things that you've picked up. Really good stuff. There's one thing that I did raise in the workshop, if I recall, and I just wonder if you'd considered appropriate to add something along these lines in. And that's around consideration of the council and government investment in CRL, the potential around light rail, also Auckland Airport. And the reason that I raise those things is they're game changers, because light rail, you would hope, is going to free up access. You'd like to think that the same thing is true of CRL. Obviously, Auckland Airport is a major player, and there's huge investment occurring there, and that is somewhat of a substitute for sea freight. So I just wonder if it's possible to pick up something along those lines, Mr. Chair, because they're not obvious to me in the other points that we're making.
Look, I think at the moment the letter does refer to, you know, the important infrastructure connections, supply chains, etc. It just doesn't name them by, you know, CRL or North Island trunk line or this and that. It's. Would I be correct to say, Toby, you've referenced all of what Councillor Walker refers to, but it's more embracing sort of language?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the approach we've taken to the letter, so that it refers to the Upper North Island and its supply chain infrastructure that supports those logistics. I mean, we would see those as included. I mean, might I suggest that at the meeting on the 13th that we make sure that we express those to the group.
Okay, well, we'll take a note of that and for the meeting on the 13th. Thank you. Question, Councillor Filipaina?
Thank you, and I reserve my right to speak to the item. Toby, look, can I be rest assured? Well, no, I think the question is, how far are they behind schedule? I know His Worship the Mayor said they're supposed to be up in March. We now have them up, but I know that there would have been a schedule where they anticipated group getting together. So are they behind with their schedule that would have been out maybe at the beginning of this year? And if so, where are they behind in schedule?
So probably the important point to make there is the group itself has only formed in September, so I don't think it would be fair to say that they're behind schedule, but it is the case that the group was sort of set up something like 6 months after it was originally raised with Cabinet, so it's just taken them a bit of time to get started. That then means that the dates within the terms of reference in the February-March paper are probably something like 6 months behind. But I think I note in the report that it's just not quite clear what they're working to at the moment. The other point to maybe keep in mind is something like this is probably a little bit movable. So in terms of a fixed deadline on some of these outputs, that might be a reaction to the level of detail that they encounter. So a simple answer there would be the working group looks to be, in terms of their outputs, maybe 6 months behind the original schedule, but it's not the fault of the working group itself, is my read of the situation.
I understand that. I'm actually more concerned around the original schedule that they had in March, and whether there's any movement from March through to September now, which is obviously 6 months, because we're starting on the back, they're starting on the back foot.
Yeah.
And so that's why I asked the question. It's not about the working group when they got set up, but the schedule they had in March. Because with the working groups we have within council, we end up putting reasons, schedule, you name it. You know, this is why we're doing this. So, okay, I'm assuming with the look that you don't know what the schedule was in March.
Our intention is to ask them for a work program when we meet them.
Pardon? Sorry.
Our intention is to ask them for a work program when we meet them, so that we can advise. Well, so we're aware and can advise you of what their intention now from a work program is. There is no published one at this
No,
time.
but I mean, okay. Now, having read through the report, and I know it's in the letter, why haven't we explicitly put in our agenda report the fact that they've already dismissed the two options we had, namely Manukau and the further Thames, as options? I know we've got it in the letter, but, you know, that's all good. But for me, I would love to see it in the actual bulk of the report. And so when our community, when Tamaki Makaurau reads it, they are explicitly, if they don't read the letter, it's explicitly spelled out there. Not unless I've missed it, but it doesn't say in here that, you know, that is a concern that they've discounted two of them.
Can
Well, look, we are asking them to, if you look at A2, we're asking that very point, and it's one individual that's said that they are rubbish. I think the word used was they are rubbish. Look, I think that's colourful rhetoric, but let's have a conversation with the working group on the 13th, and Mayor will be raising that very point. That
Chair,
there was
sorry, the only reason I asked is because it's in the letter. That's why.
Yeah.
It's in the letter, and why don't we explicitly say it in our agenda, the bulk of our agenda, and not only the letter? That's all. Because I just think it should be.
I might be able to help.
Yes, please.
Alf. Under A2, we've got in brackets here, including detailed analysis of the two options identified for further exploration in Auckland's Port Future Study. This is the report to us. The letter that I'll sign off to them mentions explicitly what those two options are. So I think we do have it covered.
Okay.
This report doesn't go to them, it goes to us.
Yeah.
The letter goes to them, and I've already explicitly said to the chair of this working group, we put a lot of work into those two options and you've dismissed them out of hand. That gives us no confidence in your report.
Sorry to labour it. I know it's to us, but our community reads this.
Yeah, no,
That's all I'm saying.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
We could have spelt it out in the report
that's
by
all.
name.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Casey, question?
Yeah, it's following on from Alfie. The statements made by the Minister, the Mayor has referred to, but I'm interested in having that as to put back the D that seems to have been taken out of resolutions. So we've got the D in the body of the report, which reads, public statements made regarding the study suggest predetermination of an outcome prior to analysis being undertaken, which is unhelpful. The work of the group must be conducted in a transparent, objective and inclusive manner to ensure there is confidence in the report's recommendations. So I'm not sure why that D is not up there, so I suggest it goes back in. But what I wanted to do was change the understatement of the year, which is also in the letter, that the Minister's statements are unhelpful. And that, you kidding? It borders on bias and conflict of interest, and he should button it, basically. And so I don't know who wrote that letter. It was probably a lovely staff member, but that's, if this is going to the Minister, it's more than unhelpful. It's downright sabotage.
Sometimes you've got to suppress your emotion and set out calmly, rationally and reasonably what you believe, Councillor, and that's what I've tried to do in the letter.
Achieving the end goal.
So can we have
How to
D?
say it
can
without
we have,
saying it.
So
Mr. Chairman, can we put the D back in there? Because it's quite important, and I don't know, it's in the report, but it's not actually in the recommendation.
Councillor, you would not have been disappointed in the way I presented to Wayne Brown at the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance on Friday. The point was made very clearly and robustly, I can assure you, and so can the other people, including Toby that was in the room. So the point was made very clearly.
So can the public record just reflect that?
This is public record, isn't it?
The D, which is just to transfer the D from our page
8. The recommendations.
8. That statement to go as a D in our recommendations. I think it's just been left off by mistake.
Sorry, just to speak to that, I think that might actually just be a formatting piece.
It's just a mistake.
So in the D in the body of the report, we make the point that it's a transparent, objective, and inclusive manner, and that reads as recommendation C.
No.
And I think it's just that in the body of the report, I've ended up with 2 paragraphs explaining the sort of robust evidence-based requirement.
No, you're not getting it. No, it's not about that. It's on our page 8, and
She's
it's about
taking
public
it a step
statements made
further.
regarding the study by the Minister.
Yeah.
And we seem to have just dropped that off, and I think we need to put it back in, because that was the main topic of that workshop for hours and hours, if I recall.
It wouldn't hurt.
Let's, can I just cut?
Well,
Or is
I think I'm asking you to rely on my judgment here. I think what I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do is to get a change of mindset. We are still hopeful in the working party, and I don't want to, in the formal documents, reference the specific comments that might have been made by the Minister or the Chairman in the document. I'm trying to keep the channel of communication open, but you have my absolute assurance that the message has been given loud and clear and robustly in the meeting that I've already had. You would not have been disappointed.
I'll accept that.
We will accept that.
And,
Mr.
and if you want to play back the tape, Kathy, you said it.
Thank you.
I think you'd agree with that, Toby. The comments were made robustly.
Absolutely.
I've heard the same. Councillor Fletcher, and then Mayor Goff to speak to it.
Thank you.
Well, as you're aware, Mr. Chairman, I've missed a substantial part of the presentation. But one of the questions that I've had, and it may already have been put, but in the recommendations, and I'm interested in the weighting being put on the financial side of any change, why did you not include the chair of the Finance Committee?
For going to the meeting?
This is in the recommendations because I would have thought the financials around this are highly relevant.
51 million. Yeah.
Look, does the Chair of Finance want to attend that meeting as well? Okay, we haven't had that feedback until now, so...
Never asked.
Well, look, the motions, this is a public document, and we have received it, so, and I'm only just getting that request, so I'm sure that is fine. We'll put that in there.
Thank you.
And Mayor Goff to speak to this item, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just over a year ago, this committee, in October 2017, passed resolutions receiving the report on the Port's future study and requesting the Chief Executive to investigate alternative locations to Auckland's port and to monitor the degree of urgency for relocation. We think it might be it might be as long as 30 or 40 years away. It could be sooner, and we agreed as a committee here to advocate to central government to do a comprehensive report of the Upper North Island, because we thought any decision about the location of Auckland's port is of obviously major importance to us, but it needs to be seen within the context of the region and the country as a whole. So we were very pleased when the government came out and said, yes, they were going to do an Upper North Island strategic study into the supply chain and the port, and a specific term of reference of the report is to investigate the relocation of the ports of Auckland. Following our October meeting, I wrote directly to the Minister, Minister Shane Jones, with a copy to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, and it's available to anyone here. I'm sorry, I had asked it to be attached to this report. It should have been. But I said that, the study should examine all of the options that were set out in the Port's Future Study. I said that we should look at the fact that the Port Future Study had said that neither Northport nor Tauranga could in the future handle the weight of freight needed for the region as a whole if you took Auckland out of it entirely, and therefore a full study is necessary to make sure that we get this right, given the huge investment. We're talking about billions of dollars in the relocation of the port. I said that also that the ports of Auckland don't belong to the government, they belong to the people of Auckland. And the return to residents is about $50 million a year in dividends. And in any decision taken as a result of this study, Auckland needs to be a party to that decision and its economic interest in the port recognised in any outcomes. So what I am saying, and what I will say to the chair of the study on the 13th of December, is precisely what I told the Minister more than a year ago. So there is an absolute consistency in our position, the position we took as members of the Planning Committee, the discussion that we had at the workshop, and the letter that I wrote to the Minister a year ago last week. This is our first engagement with the working party, the first official engagement. The initial engagement was at the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance, where Wayne Brown as chair presented to it, and I fundamentally disagreed with a number of things that he said and the approach that appears to be being taken in this report. The first was the question of predetermination. If you're going to have a study on which billions of dollars of investment is going to be based, then you have to have a sound business case, a sound environmental case, and there needs to be the economic arguments around the most appropriate location for the port. I don't believe that suggesting that you're ruling out some of the key options that we spent $1 million coming up with as part of the Port Future Study is an objective or a proper way to go about the work that is being done by this working group. How can you dismiss options such as the Manukau and the Firth of Thames that the working group came up with after a year of consultation, seeking consensus, getting economic consultants to report, and suddenly it's ruled out of order by the chair without him having done any study at all on those options? I don't believe that's rational, and I don't believe that that gives us confidence in the credibility of the report if it were to proceed in that way. So the first point is, if you're going to move the port, look at all the options now. As my father as a tradesman used to say, you measure twice and you cut once. You do your homework first before you make the decisions. And I don't think their budget, and I don't think the time frame that they're working in is sufficient to give us confidence that this is the deep analysis that we need for them to get that decision right. Secondly, I have heard not a whisper from anyone to do with this study that Auckland has, the people of Auckland, have a strong financial interest in the outcome. We're talking about an asset owned by the people of our region. It's worth several $100 million. It returns $50 million a year in dividend. And all of the talk, it's like being a hospital patient with two surgeons standing over you and talking over the top of you as if you're already dead and you're not cognizant of what they're saying. And, most of us objected to that past behaviour of doctors, and I object to that behaviour on the part of this working group. our interest in this should be explicitly recognised, and this needs to be a collaborative decision made jointly, not one imposed on us by central government. Now, there are maybe different views around the table about the relocation of the Port of Auckland. My view is that, in line with the Port Future Study, at a certain point we'll run out of space. There will be in the future our desire to use some of that waterfront area, but you're not going to close down the port overnight to suddenly release 77 hectares onto the market that would collapse the market. But if they're going to do the study, and I welcome them doing a study that is legitimate, then they need to do it properly. And I think that that is absolutely critical in what we're asking for. We've spelled out the specific things that we expect them to look at, and that includes issues such as climate change and the impact on the port. It includes the long-term feasible capacity at the existing North Island ports. Let's not pretend that suddenly you could close Auckland down and put it in Tauranga and Northport, because all of the study we've done to date says that that's not viable in the medium or the longer term. I think the meeting that we have is important to get the working group back on track. I am an optimist in life. I would like to believe that if they want this report to add up to anything, that it has economic credibility. I doubt that it would be accepted by Cabinet to spend billions of dollars unless it is a credible report. And what we're trying to do, Councillor Casey, is help them to produce a credible report, not to predetermine it, but to put the resources in, to put the time into it, to give it credibility as a study on which we can rely. I think that's probably sufficient, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Just before we go to the next speaker, I need to move an extension of time until the close of business.
Happy to second.
Councillor Casey, thank you.
Till
All
9
those in
o'clock.
favour say aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Continuing on with the speaking order, Councillor Filipaina, then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I had a little laugh when His Worship the Mayor mentioned the two doctors staying over a patient, and that's because in 2013 I had to get 2 stents put in, and the doctor said to me while I was listening, well, said to the nurse while he was putting the stents in, "Oh my gosh, it's 95% blocked." He was a walking corpse, and I felt like saying, "Hello, I can hear you." So I understand using that analogy. And look, I am really concerned about this working group. I really am. And my concerns are, one, looking at the report, and that is the group will report on 3 lines of inquiry to Cabinet. I'm concerned about C, a feasibility study to explore moving the locations of ports of Auckland with serious consideration to be given to Northport. Now, I know that His Worship the Mayor had a discussion with Minister Jones, and I have no doubt at all, Your Worship, that you would have mentioned to the Minister that it has to be evidence-based. I also have no doubt at all that it has to be looked at it objectively, and no doubt at all that it has to be looked at impartially. I cannot see that happening with some members on that particular working group, but as everybody knows, this is not our working group, it's the government. So it is what it is, but I do, however, share concerns. Chair and members of the committee, on page 6 of the Port's future study, and it's the recommendations to Auckland Council. And there was a quote in there, a note for us, and the notes read, "Note the CWG's recommendations are offered as an integrated package. Adopting some recommendations while not implementing others could result in adverse unintended consequences." And it listed for them. Mana whenua, we've spoken about it, and Member Ngāmane has mentioned it. You know, that was another key recommendation from our consensus working group. And this is why I'm concerned around the 3 statements that the working group, the central government working group, will be coming back to central government. So, you know, I applaud His Worship the Mayor in regards to the letter that you'll be signing off. I would have loved to have put the Firth of Thames and Manukau actually in our report so our community, I have no doubt they will read that letter and see it in there. But I look forward to at least hopefully some impartiality and objectiveness in regard to this. So thank you, Chair, and we'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but it did occur to me that Shane Jones might be listening, so maybe there's some relevance. And I really just wanted to speak to an item that I raised earlier at the workshop, and I don't have any issue that you've incorporated in here, and that's around climate change, and in particular, I think the major thing that goes to a port is sea level rise. And one of the things that I emphasised at the workshop is the almost unique situation around the Port of Auckland is that it's located in the immediate vicinity of billions of dollars worth of real estate. Billions and billions and billions. And the consequence is, if ever there is an area where you will invest some money in climate change adaptation to build the walls that are necessary to protect the city and protect the port, this is it. And that is happening, and we're approaching worst case scenario, and I would suggest within the next few years, and literally just 2 or 3 years, that will come to light. And that certainly goes to the absolute necessity for a scenarios-based approach so that we can adapt and change our decision-making nimbly when required. So I guess the other person that we need to get around the table, in addition to Minister Twyford, and he's obviously relevant here, is Mr. Jones. So I hope, Shane, if you're listening, that you can make some time in your busy schedule to come and have a session with us.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Casey.
It's a question that's just come into my mind. If this group on the 13th of December decides to continue its merry way and not take our advice, and I'm looking at the risk factor as identified by staff that it places, there would be a clear and compelling risk to the protection and enhancement of Auckland's interests into the long term. What's our fallback position? Can we go to the Powerful Privileges Committee to claim there's been a conflict of interest and get them booted off? So what's it's a serious question. If they do not take our advice, what happens next? Because it's Christmas and we'll all be shot through.
Well, look,
there was a question through the chair to the mayor. He knows the answer to it.
Yeah, look, the answer is that I think it would be a huge step by any government to effectively confiscate the assets of hundreds of billions of dollars from a third of the country's population if we were adamantly opposed to the recommendations which we believed were not evidence-based and were not impartial. So there is every incentive for the government to set out, if it wants to act in this area, to ensure that what they are doing is evidence-based and impartial. Because why would we accept it if it was not one or other of both of those things? We wouldn't accept it if it wasn't if it was deemed impartial, and we wouldn't accept it if we deem it not to be evidence-based. So I think, look, I'm here wanting to cooperate with the government, as I would with any government. Let's try to find out where the truth lies, where the port, a port should best be located to serve the interests of Auckland, Northland, and the Bay of Plenty and the Waikato. So we are there ready to cooperate, ready to be open-minded, ready to work with the government, and all we're asking for in exchange is the same set of attitudes from the government.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. I think we'll close it at that. And all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried.
Can we declare that carried unanimously? Because that helps in our presentation.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah.
It is?
Even the
Thank you.
audience said yes.
It is carried unanimously.